Nupss Achievement Week is way underway. We are trying to complete as many of the things that I want to get done in Dawn Trail as possible. I even made myself a lovely little sheet on paint for the things I want to get done. And we were going to start with Extremes. I love Extremes. They were, honestly, from like the Raider in me, they were the most fun thing I did throughout all of my first ever playthrough of Final Fantasy XIV. They're perfect for me from like a stream point of view, is that we can... I think only a couple of them went like longer than a day, like original Thornton when we're still learning the game and getting to grips with it, stuff like that. But I've had some tremendous experiences there. Shinryu was amazing, and they're one of the things I'm excited for the most. But a little different this time. The old ones that were like from A Realm Reborn and, you know, the older expansions, I got to do completely blind because a lot of people had joined FF14 later down the line, right? After those expansions have been out and not gone back to do older content yet. So it's very easy for me to source people who were like, just like me, just getting into the game, not to grips with all the details and the minutiae and min-maxing of raiding yet, and jump into encounters. And Extremes typically bear some resemblance to the normal, but they're not, right? They're not. If you've ever done them, certainly doing them minimized level and no echo, is you're going to have a weird time. Couldn't do that anymore, and I can't do that anymore, which is honestly totally fine. Totally fine. As much as I have a very, very strong core audience of people who play the game, my personal feeling is it would be disgusting and gross for me to ever expect people to like not play content until I deem I am ready, right? The streamer is now ready. But I'm pointing this out because we had a couple of people who were blind who just hadn't done it yet because Extremes are that like next tier of content. But a lot of people had done it. And people were getting upset. They were like, oh, you're being robbed of the experience. But there's very, very few people I would want to play with who haven't done this yet. I would have to like seek out like a random mishmash of strangers or whatever to go with, and it'd just be less fun and less interesting. So I fully accept that, understanding it, and I go in kind of blind. So what happens is the dudes I'm playing with are generally chilling on Discord, or some of them are. I go in blind and I'm trying to figure everything out. What I will say with both of the Extremes is, besides like one or two mechanics, and I really love this about how the current raid content is. It was kind of the same commentary I had with Arcadian, is that upon inspection, like, it's pretty clear what the hell is going on. And it's sure it's going to catch you out, for sure. And even on repeat kills, because you can get the wings from here, and I do want the wings, is that, you know, people were dying. You had done this fight before. I died, other people died, all this kind of stuff. There's lots of things that can catch you out very quickly, but really fun and really interesting mechanics that once you see them, besides like one or two, and I was like, I'm not quite sure how this works. I had like 3 theories. I'm like, this either works this way, or this way, which is what you would do in progress. Is like, this is either working, this is one of a number of things is happening here. And once you've sussed it, you're like, okay, that totally makes sense. Usually stuff that involves like pairing up or something along those lines. Let's go through it. Veggearmanda. Veggearmanda was the easiest of the two by miles. I think we killed this on the second pull. The second pull of doing it. The only thing that I had to look out for was the volcano spawns. Definitely was not sure after the first couple of times. It's like, why is the volcano happening here? And then I caught it out the corner of my camera. I was like, oh, an actual volcano is spawning off in the distance, which lets you know where you're supposed to go. Also, very immediate action here. So Pictomancer has an interestingly elongated opener. Anybody who's played Picto will know that, like, you have, like, I've done a little bit of research now. Is like, there's like 3 or 4 things you can do with your opener to try and maximize it. But you get attacked very, very quickly in this fight. And I actually found on the, I think, like, we did them both a couple of times because I wanted to go back. I wasn't sure about certain mechanics. I was like, can we go again? Because I want to see exactly how this mechanic works, even after we killed it, to get a smooth kill, you know. So it was like, okay, I can do this fight now. It's like, oh, I actually don't need to do what everybody else is doing because they're not as tied. Almost like a black mage style, is you kind of want to be in your ground effect when you paint the landscape. It's like, I actually don't need to do what everyone else is doing, which is a super safe way, is I can put a little bit more pressure on myself and hang around at the beginning. And I almost got it correct on the second time. I was like, I'm pretty sure if I did this again, I would be able to find the sweet spot where I don't need to do anything. And get my full opener out. So that kind of min-maxing was really fun. Overall, I liked everything about this, it was just normal turned up a little bit, is what I would say. It's very immediate start instead of the usual, like, you get a few seconds, and then it'll do some AoE damage, which is usually none of your concern anyway, as a damage dealer or a tank or whatever, and healers barely have to notice it. And then the fight sort of gets going. This got going immediately, and just kept going and kept having fun. But simple, small amount of mechanics, I would say. Like, very few that were just little bits of overlap. Some people have frost, some people have lightning. The most interesting mechanic that I liked here, actually, surprisingly, I was suspecting to dislike this once I realized how it worked, was hiding behind the tank tower as Veggearmanda sort of like moves to one of 3 locations. So you're constantly having to adjust, but also pay attention because her position is random of where she wants to go. Sometimes she'll go back to the middle, sometimes she'll go right, sometimes she'll go all the way to the left, sometimes she'll go middle, then left, middle, right, and things like that. So you do have to pay a little bit of attention with a little bit of movement. Again, WoWish. I said this about the Arcadian, is like, this is a WoWish style thing with constant little adjustments and min-maxing your play, and I absolutely adored it. Very simple fight. That's not something I'm going to farm because I don't want the wings from that one. What I do want, though, is the wings from Ja Rule. Now, this one is definitely a little more difficult. I would say a little more difficult. It's got a couple of very nasty points that even the people that had killed this quite a few times, like there's definitely people in the group that already had wings because they got a lucky drop, but definitely caught a lot of people out with what was going on. Despite the fact, on the face of it, it's really simple what's going on, but if you make a minor mistake here, you do absolutely get screwed completely. And I would actually go back to Veggearmanda. There is a really nasty point in this fight where the ice spawners appear and shoot the lines out, and you have a very specific spot to get into, which is quite noticeable because there's an obvious gap in their spawn location. But if you get hit by that, you get stunned for so long that you die to something else. Like, that's a really nasty, like, slap you in the face sort of mechanic if you get that wrong. And this has similar things going on. The opening of the fight was really nice with a couple of tethers to grab. Just paying attention to the name of the mechanic, so he's either going to jump forward or jump backwards, and moves 1 square. So you have a much larger size of the room that he's going to take up. A lot of paying attention to his sword animation in this one, particularly with like if he's going left, if he's going right, usually while something else is going on. So you can feel very chill, but if you're like focused on, say, the area denial mechanic, and not paying attention to what the boss is doing, is you can very be like, oh, I'm cool, and then suddenly you get slapped in the face. You're like, oh, well, there's another thing going on. And I need to be careful of that. A couple of duo mechanics that you do need to be more aware of, especially because the mechanics, certainly in the interdimensional phase, whatever you want to call it, where he spawns his platforms with the stitching, is what I call them, has you looking around the room and not really at the boss, because you're like looking at platform 1, it's like, okay, that's going to area deny over here, there, and then you've got to turn your camera, look at the other one. And at the same time, he's like, yeah, but I'm also going to swipe half the platform. So it's not as easy as, like, put 2 images together and overlay them in your head and then find a safe spot. You've also got to pay attention to this. Similarly with the next mechanic, which I did not get. Even though I survived it, I would absolutely admit that I just, like, everybody's standing over here and I'm just doing damage because it was usually during a cooldown window, so I'm just going to stand here and everything's fine. Was the fire and wind mechanic, which I didn't even clock it happen. And after we killed the fight, I always ask my chat, I was like, okay, was there anything that I missed or didn't get right? And what I mean by that is there a mechanic that I was doing, like an individual personal responsibility mechanic, and I was kind of like getting away with it because I had a theory of how the mechanic worked, and it kind of successfully works, but it's not actually how it works. That happened a couple of times. So I always go back and I'm like, okay, what did I get wrong? And they're like, you did not clock whatsoever what was going on with wind and fire. And I was like, wind and fire? And they're like, yeah, the wind and fire mechanic. And I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I have no idea. I was like, right, we go again. So we jumped back in again. Got the group was like, yeah, we're down. I was like, oh, I totally see what's going on. And then I was like, I'm pretty sure I can showcast this. You can, but the actual, it's quite a long wind up to it happening. So I was like chilling and I was like, oh yeah, you can just shortcast this. Just make sure you don't get hit by fire. So I was like, shortcast, carried on DPSing, and then suddenly I got blasted off the platform. I was like, what the hell? I was like, yeah, shortcast is a very small window, which will stop you getting knocked back. And this mechanic has a pretty long wind up. So I was like, oh, god damn it. Obviously, the mechanic that caught people out the most, and this wasn't just on me as a first timer, is the phase with the traveling explosions and donuts. In theory, extraordinarily simple. And I have no doubt from now on, it would be extraordinarily simple. And you simply have two lines traveling across the platform, and the platform is full of swords, and those swords are activators. And one side is circles, which is explosions, and the other side is donuts, which means when they interact with the sword, they will do an AoE, but there'll be a safe spot in the middle. And the simple, very obvious idea is you stand on the sword when a donut's going to overlap it, because you'll be fine. You can just stand in DPS, and it will just naturally travel over you. Then at some point, both of the lines cross over, and you swap over to the other side. However, and I will admit now, I'm still not completely clear on this, despite the fact I am told repeatedly it's really obvious, and there's something I suffer from immensely in Final Fantasy XIV, and that is really overcomplicating mechanics. I don't know what it is. It's just part of my brain. Like, if the mechanic is, like, very, very obvious, you know what I think it is? To those who see it, it feels very much like a word search to me. And I'm sure everybody here has done a word search at some point. It's a grid of letters, and you have to find the word in the grid. Is that once you see it, it is like... It's like a bat signal. Like, it's so obvious where it is. Like, how could you even not see this? It's very blatantly where it is, right? It's the same as knowing the answer to a question in a quiz. It's like, who doesn't know this answer? And sometimes I will spot, say, 15 mechanics. I'll get 14 out of 15. No problem. Instantaneously. And then that 15th one, I just don't see it. And the difference is during this phase where these donuts and explosions going off, like, he either does a massive swipe in a circle around him, or he does another donut where it's safe around him and the entire rest of the arena gets slashed. And I just couldn't see it. I was like, what is... Because they both have the same name. The spell he's casting has the same name, and it's a different stance that he has in what he's doing. And I'm like, I kind of need to see them next to each other, and this happens in normal, so I'm probably going to jump back into normal to see which one it is. And so I'm like, oh, because when I see the difference, it's like you want a split screen, and it's like, oh, that one's that one, which you would do in raid progress, right? But I was like, I just don't see it, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, what is different here? And I'm looking at it, and everyone's just like, it's the same as we had in the expert dungeons. It's like, it's squares and circles, and I'm like, oh yeah. It's totally squares and circles, and I'm looking for some Omega crackpot theory to go with it. It's like, okay, well, maybe if the wind shifts to the left and his sword is blue and it's raised up in his left arm, then that means that's going to happen. It's like, no. No, and I know, because everybody was laughing at me. They're like, it's so obvious. I'm like, I don't see it. So that's something I still need to work on here. But either way, I felt very comfortable with this fight overall. We actually did a lot of pulls here, because obviously the darkened wings people prefer to the sort of eagle wings that you get from Veggearmanda. So we did a few pulls on this because people were like, yeah, I still want the materials and things from this. So we'll do some more pulls. And I kind of think I want to do 1 kill a day. It's not going to rack up the like 60 plus kills a lot of people seemingly have to get the wings, and they've still not dropped. But throwing in a kill a day, I think that's fair go to try and get some wings going. I would like to get the wings because they're very cool, or at least start building up the resources so I can eventually buy them myself from the tomes. What a fun experience, though. Like, yes, in some regards, like, it's a shame we can't do full blind and be like, okay, we need to do light parties here. We want to set this up and figuring out the markers. We need to stagger this explosion on Ja Rule. We need to do this. I really liked how obvious and interesting. This is what I've spoken to a lot of game devs about. When we've sat down at dinner, you know, we've got a couple of beers in us, and we're having some food, and we're shooting the shit with some of the best video game MMO developers in the world. It's especially fun when you're sat with people who have created some of your best raid encounters, so they really know what they're talking about, and they have a good experience, and you can get in the weeds with it. You noticed it a little bit in my interview with Yoshi P, is that I'm not sure if Chris cut it, but at certain points, me and Yoshi P were talking about things that, like, the translator was like, I don't know what you guys are talking about anymore. But I love it, right? I love it. I'm, like, super into it. And that happens regularly off camera, because you can usually... It's tough, right? I'm very privileged in this way, is that you can talk about things that aren't really fit for public consumption. Because they're too in the weeds, they're too nuanced, they're too ethereal almost. for a lot of the casual viewers who just want like a cool boss to really understand or want to know about. Like, they don't care. But in this regard, this is something that we can get into, is that the markers and things that got put down, like when you see them, how explanatory they are. And coming back to this knockback phase, you had a really interesting phase here. And I often have argued, it's like, overcomplicating things is such a waste of time. So if we look at it from the WoW perspective, is that there was a war that happened for about 6 years where add-on development just kept outpacing how the developers were combating against it. And it became a back and forth struggle where they just inevitably created more and more complex encounters, because they knew that add-on technology had come so far that they would, if they put something basic in, like, you know, something reasonably difficult, then it would be completely trivialized by add-ons. And I know some people are going to go, you should ban add-ons, but the game was built with that in mind. So their perspective is, we need to manage this. And they've done a great job of that recently. Decent job of finding mechanics that are simpler. They just don't need add-ons, but they're still very punishing. And they've shown their ability to do that recently. So I don't want to get into that discussion now. But I would hold up the knockback phase with Ja Rule as being a great example of that, because it all is interesting. You're on 2 different platforms, you see them spawn, and it starts with a pairing up to knock a friend back. That's really fun. When you two get when your group gets to like work together in a real handshake teamwork to make something cool happen, where you all get knocked in the air, and it's got this cinematic feel to it. And you see all your friends get knocked back by you because you did your job correctly, and the other guy also stood correctly. So you all have this like very beautiful, almost fountain effect of people going over. And then you get 2 very obvious things. The green pool instantly indicates to anybody with a little bit of FF14 experience that this is some sort of knock or dive bomb animation. They've always been very good at using that tell all the way back since Coils. That is what the indicator is for what this does. So you recognize it, and you're like, oh, yeah, I know what that is. And then you have some very simple things going on. You have the dunce caps, which is like, okay, you need to split into squares. Okay, very cool. And it all... FF14 is at its absolute strongest when the mechanics play out in a way that it looks beautiful. It looks like poetry of gameplay. And it reminds me of so many cool things that I've seen. And I would point out Paragon versus Archimonde Heroic here as their management of the Wrath chain, where they just all stood in these perfect lines. It's like, wow, that is a coordination that is unwritten. And it also goes back to a video I made that I got mocked heavily for from my guild members, despite the fact that the raid community liked it, which was non-verbal communication, is that you can feed off what your friends are doing in order to position everything correctly and nicely without the need for comms, without the need for, you know, organized Discord and raid leaders and things like that. Is it all plays out so beautifully. And then a very obvious way of doing something cool. So in this one, it's like, oh, he's facing us and he's going to slash our platform, so we can use the knock, and everybody sort of like cascades over to the other side, and then they have a nice gather, and then they come up with another mechanic, which is the chain, which means the other team gets to do it. So there's a really cool balance here of a cool thing happening that also isn't leaving someone out. Because I can imagine some players who are just having a really fun time be like, oh, I wish I got to do the knockback, and I wish I got to jump over the platform. And they make sure everybody gets to have a go and take part in this. And it also means there's more personal responsibility. Nobody is going to just skip doing this, right? Like your weaker player, for example, might be like, I just wish I don't get hit by anything. There's none of that going on. But it's also very basic, so you're not really in any danger in any way. To make this work. And I was like, this is a beautiful little piece of raid mechanics that are going on here. Gorgeous teamwork. Pairs, and then it's pairs in terms of the knockback, into light parties on either side, into regathering, into both teams getting to swap sides in a Thaddeus manner. And I was like, this is beautiful. This little section here is essentially what I would love to see so much more of, done really well. Super interesting. We're flying around. We're going into the air. We're not just stood still DPSing a training dummy or anything like that. We're doing really interesting things that are a culmination of very basic things. Walk into a thing. Spread out a little bit. And that's the kind of stuff I feel I could spend, and probably will do at some point, literally like hours talking to an encounter designer about how special little moments that like that are. And it's really interesting as well to me is that most people will be like, oh yeah, it's the knockback phase. And what I see when I look at this is like, this is magnificent. This is so cool. It's really cool. There's a lot of just great fun interactions happening with a raid team that you can giggle about. Someone get knocks off, someone goes the wrong way, you didn't do my chain right, blah blah blah, and it's all like, oh god damn it, but not in like an angry way because it's fun. Yeah. Makes me happy. Makes me happy in my tummy. Either way, the extremes were fantastic. I'm obviously looking forward to the next extreme. Yeah, I know people are disappointed I didn't get to do it full blind, but I have to be honest, unless I literally do not play Final Fantasy for the next 6 years, probably, something along those lines, I'm not really going to have that experience again in terms of the full raid group. The best I can do, and I'm happy with it, I want to be clear on that, I'm totally fine with it, is I'm blind, and I'm figuring everything out. Because that's the joy I get from raiding in any game, is like figuring it out. Solve the puzzle. Why is this doing this thing? Why is that happening? And if I can have that experience, which I did here, then I'm fine. And I'm totally happy. And I had a great time. So those are the extremes. If you're unsure about these or you're finding them too hard, I would watch a little guide. Because I didn't see any mechanic that was really complicated. It was more a case of everything's really dead set as to what happens in FF14, and certainly in Extremes. It's like, just take it baby steps and you'll be absolutely fine. I can see this being pugged very easily and probably already is. So thank you for listening, guys. Next step is a combination of things. Squirrel, we want to do some world bosses. You've seen the sheet. All those things are coming up this week. All right, so I'll see you then. Bye, guys.